has declined, economic inequality rose. And that keeps happening. The economic inequality continues to grow. The 1% personified here in Illinois by our governor are trying to destroy organized labor. Our frontline communities are under attack. They are the victims of environmental racism or are otherwise somehow disenfranchised and disempowered. They're used as the dumping ground for the byproducts of our economy. They're treated as if they, their health, their families, their poverty, their suffering don't matter. They are disposable. It's not like the 1% is exactly out to destroy them, more that they just don't care about them. Our fragile ecosystem is under attack. Extreme, serious, dangerous attack. When it is gone, we cannot replace it. We human beings and all the species with which we share this ecosystem are profoundly threatened. We all three need each other. We learned that Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, dismisses the term a just transition and says it's just another name for a fancy funeral. And he has a point. If we succeed in stopping the pipelines in this country and stopping fracking, many decent, high-paying jobs with benefits, unionized jobs, will be lost. No question. But if we don't stop them, other human beings may soon have some literal funerals. Do they matter? Let's together try to figure out how we can solve this conundrum in such a way that the burden is shared and nobody gets hurt too much.
You know, there's some concern by the major fossil fuel players in the U.S. that they're going to go to a home-based solar system. There's talk of that in Europe. Okay, and Europe's far ahead of America on a lot of these things. But part of that has to do with a more liberal sense of government there and less major corporate influence than we have in the U.S. Okay, I don't know that we're going to do that because it's truly my belief that until we can get our arms around the lobbying force and the lobbying muscle of the major corporate interests in the U.S., you're not really going to be able to change any of these policies because they're going to push to control the transmission and the production of energy, all right? And whether that's fossil fuel, nuclear, whatever. One of our international union's main positions here recently is that natural gas is a transitionary fuel, okay? It helps us to transition from heavy crude to renewable energies. I don't know if that's true. We know that when we put up a wind turbine anywhere, and there have been a number of wind farms that went up here in the past decade, the major benefit for the corporation in that is the carbon offset credits. There's no real reason for them to do it other than to get carbon offset credits so they can burn fossil fuel somewhere else. It's just a game that they're playing on us, guys. I mean, and the men and women that I represent, the families that I represent, we make our money through doing construction. We build your roads, your bridges, this library, the schools that our children go to. And we build pipelines too, to transmit energy. We do traffic control and create pathways for energy to get from point A to point B. And let's be honest, we live in the Chicago metropolitan area. We burn more energy than we produce. We don't produce anything here as far as energy. And we're not in a wind zone where we're going to get a lot of wind farms. And we're not in a solar zone where we're going to get a lot of sunlight and we're going to be able to make these solar farms. There's always these speculators out there that say, oh, we're going to do this. At one time there was something they said, well, in Kendall County we're going to make this big solar farm. But you see, that's still based on the same model that we're talking about with these energy producers, the transmission, and the major corporate interests. This isn't going to that small solar energy on the rooftop. Once again, I don't think that you're going to be able to create any kind of transition until you're able to get a major grip on the multinational corporations that are driving the policy decisions in this country. I just don't think it's possible. Every time we have some major conference at a national level, and we just came from a major convention in Las Vegas here recently, and that was more of our internal governance. But though they bring in people, you know, big name people, major politicians and major, you know, corporate association players, and they're telling us, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to create these jobs, we're going to, you know, invest this to, you know, and it's some exponential amount of money. It's just out of control. We're going to invest this to get jobs for you guys. Okay, that's great. But they're not talking about changing anything that's going to affect their bottom line. They're heavily invested, and they're spending money to lobby our government to keep the system the way that it is. And that, I don't see that we're going to change anything through anything other than lobbying and major change in Washington. And I don't see it. And maybe I'm a cynic. There's a major transportation lobbying effort that goes on every year. Every House and Senate rep throughout the state comes in and comes in for their, you know, contribution, and they talk to them about, you know, what we need for transportation. And that's going on not just with transportation, but with ComEd's there, AT&T is there. All these people are coming together. In our belief is to create jobs for our members, okay? But ComEd is not worried so much about creating jobs for our members as they are in inflating their profit margin. These are the people, these are the companies that are out there fighting you every day, and they're kind enough to send you a piece of mail and every month. So I don't know. I'm just a guy that runs a labor local and thinks about trying to keep those families fed.
Things have changed in the last 10 years as far as the whole energy thing and the push for the EPA to really push on utility companies to make changes. Our particular company of NIPSCO, Northern Indiana Public Service Company, we got 1.2 million customers across the upper third of Indiana. We are part of MISO, which is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. So they created these groups which covers the mid part of the continent is the MISO group. MISO tells us when we can bring our units on and off, and they go by the cheapest. So on our own, the NIPSCO, in 2010 we were 90% coal reliable. 90% of our energy came from coal. In 2015 it was down to 72%. So there's quite a difference, a lot of reduction. MISO itself was at 75% coal overall with all their gas and different things combined, and they're now down at 52%. So we've already made big strides as far as reducing coal, our reliability on coal. The AFL-CIO says in the next few years there's going to be over 300 coal-fired units shut down across the nation. Now, he knows exactly where I'm going, and we talk about jobs and justice here. Utility workers' jobs are very good paying jobs because they're very dangerous jobs. We've had over 24 people killed on our job sites. It's a very dangerous job. So it's a high paying job. And when you look at, I looked yesterday at Indiana's mean normal income for a family is $52,000. The average for their power plant, the average job pays $90,000. Now, closing down those units will lose 250 jobs. So take 250 times 90,000, that's a lot of money that gets pumped into the economy. Now our guys, we spend a lot of money on the economy. We're not rich and putting it into, you know, all kinds of off over foreign seas accounts. We're buying stuff. So that's stuff that's going out in the market that help the market. So, and to give you an idea, our Bailey plant, the coal is 480 megawatts. It takes about 130 people to do that 130 megawatts of coal, because you got trains coming in, you got the coal handlers are out there, they're pushing it, because you got to keep moving coal. Otherwise, if it sits there, spontaneous combustion, because of being a fossil type thing, it'll catch on fire. So you got to be moving it constantly. So you got people constantly moving it. You got people that are putting it into the dumpers and sending it up to the power plant so it could be used and crushed for the process. So there's all kinds of stuff that the coal-fired has of extra jobs. Now our Bailey plant, 480 megawatts, 130 people, versus our gas-fired plant down in Terre Haute, that's 530 megawatts, over 50 megawatts more. They do it with 18 people. So as we move from these coal-fired plants to these gas-fired plants, we are losing a lot of jobs. There's estimates that there's tied into coal between 175 to 200,000 jobs directly, and that doesn't count the indirect jobs. Because we got United Steelworkers that are members that drive the barges up and down the different rivers over in Pennsylvania and Ohio. We got coal miners that are losing their jobs because those are shutting down. We have the train operators. 30% of the freight out on the train line is shipping coal. So it affects all over. It wrinkles out across. So when we shut down the coal, which, you know, for global warming, it's something that's being pushed. We're losing a lot of jobs, good paying jobs out there. Over in the New England states, where during the winter vortex we had about 4 years ago, where there wasn't, since they got rid of a lot of their coal and they're mostly gas or nukes, they could not get enough gas when it got really, really cold. They came to the point where they were in a crisis situation trying to decide, do we start telling manufacturers they have to shut down, or are we going to tell resident people that they're going to have to shut them off? Because there wasn't enough pipe in the ground to be able to handle the volume of gas they needed to supply both. Northwest Indiana is the most congested area for industrial in the nation right now. You got a lot of steel mills, you got a lot of BP refineries, Praxair, Cargill. They're very congested. They need consistent, reliable energy. It can't be based off of solar where all of a sudden a rainstorm comes in and the solar goes down. Because in our units, we're scrambling to make up the difference in those units in the megawatt to keep the grid, because the grid has to keep a certain amount of megawatts in order to keep everybody, all the lights on here and everywhere. The other thing is when you move to solar, we're pretty much in the utility business, mostly union. The solar is less than 2% union, which tells me no pensions, no retirement medical, low wages, that they're not good paying jobs. The other issue that I have personally is we have the government telling us you have to reduce your emissions, which I understand. The part I don't understand, they allow businesses to buy the windmills over in China and other places, other countries that we know they don't have the clean air technology on those manufacturers. So they're manufacturing the clean air parts to put here to make clean air, but we're buying them from factories that have no clean air technology, so they're pumping out whatever they have to make the parts to bring them over here. So I think there should be a fair playing field here as far as some kind of rules put in effect on where you get your solar panels, where you get your windmills, so that those jobs stay here, and we know that we're truly trying to be clean air technology. And like our company, we make a lot of money off of creating electric. We take the coal, we crush it, it heats up, cause steam. The whole point of coal is to heat up the boiler to steam, to cause the steam to turn the turbine. Well, we make money by doing that. Now, once we take that away, how are we going to maintain, where's the money going to come to maintain the power lines, the towers, the transmission line? We are now building a 765,000 volt tower line, 70-mile tower line, which costs a lot of money to build that thing. But it's supposed to help because coming around Chicago and then going over to the east, Ohio and out to New York, this is a very heavy area. How are these utility companies like NIPSCO, where are they going to get the money? That's going to be a surcharge on top of people, because if we can't create electric, to help offset it, and you get to the point where it's renewables, then where's the money going to come? So it's going to get really interesting here. And if they get the batteries, they develop batteries, because there's about 5 batteries right now that are in the development stage. If they get that developed, that'll change everything. Because all you'll have to do is bring it up enough with the windmill or solar, just enough to charge that battery during the day, and then you're good for the rest of the day. And that'll wipe out gas, electric, all the way around. And then now you're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs. So it's going to be very interesting on how it works. But then again, the other countries, India and China, have said, we're not doing anything about it, period. You went through your industrial revolution, we get to have ours.
I'm from East Chicago, Indiana. I live in a sacrificed community that was spoken about earlier. But what I've been trying to do, and I want to speak about what the 2 people ahead of me spoke about, the union issues, a just transition includes the communities, and it also includes jobs. We heard about the job equation, we heard the power equation, and the energy equation. Those are all very important things. And we have, as an environmentalist, I'm the only environmentalist on this panel, I feel I have to sit on top of their interests, not challenge their issues. But we have to find a way in which our values are stacked and we can work together. How many of you have heard about Calumet recently in the news, or East Chicago and the lead contamination? We have a huge problem because of the last 100 years of industrialization. Prior to 1985, we had 5 lead refineries in and around this one neighborhood. And in fact, in 1972, they built a housing project right on top of a lead refinery. So today, we're having to deal with the massive contamination. This affects 25% of my city is in a Superfund site. Over 1,100 people are now being forced evacuated. The lead levels are as high as 400 parts per million triggers an action, cleanup action. The lead levels in this neighborhood are at 91,000 parts per million. Inside some of the residents' homes, it was at 33,000 parts per million. What triggers a cleanup for arsenic is 28 parts per million. They found it at levels of 23,000 parts per million. In some of the homes, they found it at levels of 880 parts per million. So this is really a bad, bad problem that we're facing in this kind of a community. What we did is we doubled down on oil. We moved we moved from the Saudi light sweet crude from the Saudi Arabia to the heavy sour crude in northern Alberta. And so I'm going to give you a little quick 101 tar sands if you haven't heard about it. So this is oil that's coming from northern Alberta. This is where you're hearing a lot of people protesting. They're fighting it because it's the dirtiest, most damaging oil and energy source on this planet. And what James Hansen, the leading climate scientist, says, game over for the planet. So this is Alberta. This is the largest engineering project in human history, larger than the Three Gorges Dam, larger than the Panama Canal. It has an area, project area of the size of Rhode Island or Florida. And they're doing kind of mountaintop removal to get after the oil sands. This is also occurring in the boreal forest. It rings around the northern hemisphere. This is the largest carbon sink on the planet. This is what saves our planet, keeps it from overheating. This is now the largest deforestation project on the planet. And so what you're seeing here is you're seeing what was before, and on the right-hand side you're seeing what we call productive use for energy. These are vast areas that are being just wiped out in northern Alberta on native lands, territorial lands. Tailing ponds that are now going to be as large as the Great Lakes that you can see from outer space, that they have to boil out the tar sands. This is what they're trying to get, oil. And this is what's being piped down here. This is actually bitumen. And what they have to do is they have to slurry it with what they're getting from North Dakota, a lighter, sweeter crude, and to be able to pipe it down here to facilities like BP, or the other 25 refineries in the Midwest. The reason why I'm speaking about this is because East Chicago, because BP moved into my town, we're a part of this supply chain, energy supply chain, and it's important to know that. So here's BP on the southern shores of Lake Michigan. We're 1,400 acres. To understand how big that is, that's the size of the loop in downtown Chicago. With that, we're producing what's a lot of petroleum coke. It's a byproduct. It used to be a byproduct. Now it's a co-product. What we do to build the refineries, to build those windmills in China, the energy that they get is we ship our petroleum coke to China to build those things. So we're taking a byproduct, it's a heavy carbon petroleum coke. We're sending it to China and Brazil and other countries because we can't burn them here. And it's been blowing up in my neighborhoods, in our communities, blowing all the way around. BP just 2 years ago spilled into Lake Michigan with tar sands. They've been having lots of malfunctions and burn-offs since they completed their projects. This is one of the major, they had a compressor malfunction. They spilled onto one of our major boulevards, an oil spill at Indianapolis Boulevard. All right, so now I'm going to get to real quick to climate change and what we need to do. This is kind of the climate framework. What we do know is we know the way in which we measure climate change is we measure it by carbon, parts per million in the atmosphere, how much carbon. We know prior to the industrial age, we were at 280 parts per million. That's a baseline. Bill McKibbins has been arguing that 350 parts per million is the top limit that we need to hold to. We shouldn't go beyond that. Otherwise, we might face what we're calling climate chaos. Right now, we're at 406 parts per million. Nobody in this room will probably see below 400 in our lifetimes. That's a problem. We know that we want to hold our temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius. Right now, we're about 1.4. We're now leaning into 1.5. What that means is, and we're expecting by next year to commit ourselves to a temperature increase of 1.5. What that means is Miami is probably gone. The coastlines, many of our coastlines are gone. We see the energy the carbon that we put in the atmosphere, there's about a 10 to 20 year lag. So what we put into the atmosphere today, we'll see those effects 10 and 20 years down the line. That's why we're saying that probably by 2036, Miami will probably not exist anymore. So we had the Paris negotiations just this past year. We're going to be having more every other year. And we were asking for a commitment to 1.5, not to go above that. Because not only will we lose Miami, we're going to lose a lot of perhaps Philippines, we're going to lose Bangladesh. Bangladesh has 150 million people. India has already put a 1,700-mile fence between Bangladesh and India because they expect climate refugees to try to escape. So those are the realities that we're facing. We're looking at 2 degrees is a commitment that at the Paris negotiations where they committed to. But they committed to also a cap and trade program. That's putting it in the marketplace and letting the market decide how we're going to solve this problem. I really don't know if that's going to be a really good approach. Now these are non-binding commitments from each country. Also the financial commitments. There is no binding financial commitments. There is no just transition to a low carbon economy. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what a just transition and kind of what way in which I look at it, just like I did about my community. I look at a little bit of the history, I look at the existing conditions, and then we'll look at some principles. What were some parts of the solutions that we can look at? So in the last 35 years, what we've seen is basically a collapse in 2007, 2008 of the global economy. Our economy has not been working. It needs to continue to grow out as we've been globalizing. What's affected my community, what's affected jobs, what's affected lots of things in our region is that 30, 40 years ago, we started shipping jobs overseas where they were cheaper. Well, what also happened and why we have that lead contamination is industries mitigated against their financial liabilities in the ground, that being in the water, land, and air. They didn't want to have to pay for that. So for the last 40 years, they hid those problems. And that's why we find ourselves now building on top of them new scenarios and putting housing on some of these things. So what we've seen in the last 35 years is a restructuring of our economic system, a global economic system, based on an exchange value, where it used to be based on what I would call use value. A good example is this, many of the older people probably recognize this, is you used to buy your house to use it. Now people buy it as an investment to exchange. That's the difference in where we are. We've also shifted in developed countries, we shifted to an information economy and away from a manufacturing economy. And we shifted to privatization and away from the commons. So we've seen a lot of automation and extreme wealth and power inequities out of this system. So our existing conditions today is that, like in Northwest India, ordinary workers, families in our community are left behind, and we're left with an enormous amount of debt. Good example, in my community, the median home value of a home is about $60,000. It's going down really quickly because now we're kind of considered the love canal of the Midwest. The median home value in the United States is over $200,000. We've lost a lot of wealth in the last 40 years. We have severe unemployment, low-wage jobs, we have health issues. I'm in what's called an environmental justice community. What that really means and what the material effects on a community and being an environmental, it means that the people in my community live 7 years less than the average American. It also means that they experience 7 years more health problems in the last 7 years of their life than average Americans. That's in my community. So some of the principles that I'm looking to move to in terms of a just transition and try to answer some of these questions is I think it's a social justice framework of fairness. We need to solve these issues. We may not be able to solve them on economic, a set of values that are based on economics, a competition with China or something, but I think we have to solve these on a social justice basis. We have to look at long-term strategies for planning and fair representation in decision-making processes. I look to communities like mine, which have carried the burden of industrialization for the last 100 years, to be the ones that receive some of the benefits of the next transition that we do. As I also think in terms of the labor force that has carried that burden and have been stripped of jobs, they too ought to carry the benefits of the next transition. Capital must bear the burden. Right now, capital has been concentrated in a few hands. So we need to capture that, pull that out. Anyhow, I'll just leave that all the way down. Moral integrity, trustworthiness in the trip, and everything like that. So what I'm looking at is on a local level, we're looking at cooperative models. We knew before, during the Depression, what ended up happening in communities like Gary and East Chicago, where they were vulnerable populations, they started relying on themselves. They built their own nuclear economies by themselves. And I think we need to look at some of those. And then I'm going to just leave you with this, a view outside my window.